Young billionaire visits his ailing grandmother, expecting just another routine checkup, until he sees the resident doctor and realizes she's pregnant with his child. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. The antiseptic smell of the hospital hallways mixed with the distinct scent of fresh lilies delivered every morning for the VIP patient in room 407. This was the private wing of Hayes Memorial Hospital, a state-of-the-art facility funded by the Hayes family's massive fortune. The walls gleamed with new paint and the floors sparkled, reflecting the relentless overhead lights that never slept. At the heart of this bustling environment was Dr. Olivia Bennett, 26, a brilliant resident doctor determined to finish her medical training with top honors. Few in her program could match her dedication or her ability to put patients first. She believed that every heartbeat mattered, whether it belonged to a newborn or someone whose life was quietly slipping away. Whenever her long shifts ended, she'd slip her stethoscope into her pocket and let out a tired sigh, trying to recall the last time she'd slept more than 4 hours. On an ordinary Friday afternoon, Dr. Bennett was asked to consult on a high-profile case in the hospital's specialized care unit. She hurried across the hallway, her white coat fluttering behind her in the silent breeze of the AC vents. Nurses greeted her with polite nods. Everyone recognized the unwavering seriousness on her face. But even she was taken aback by the name on the patient file waiting for her. The chart read, Helen Hayes, grandmother of William Hayes, the 27-year-old tech billionaire whose family had built half the city. Hayes Industries funded medical research, donated to universities, and even sponsored the new children's wing that Olivia sometimes visited to give small, encouraging talks to aspiring medical students. Wealth, however, often came with complicated stories and high expectations, and the mention of a Hayes immediately heightened the tension among staff. They all knew that anything involving the Hayes name could mean extensive media coverage, heavy security details, and the expectation of flawless medical care. When Olivia stepped into the private suite, she found an elderly woman seated in a wheelchair, gazing quietly through a window overlooking the hospital's manicured gardens. Mrs. Helen Hayes, silver-haired, eyes distant, posture frail. Her hands rested on a woolen blanket draped across her knees. The diagnosis was Alzheimer's, and it was already showing advanced signs. Sometimes she would call out for relatives who had long since passed or forget where she was in the middle of a conversation. Yet, at that moment, she seemed peaceful, as though locked in a memory no one else could access. Right beside Mrs. Hayes stood a tall, striking figure who immediately drew Olivia's attention. William Hayes, 27, with a perfectly tailored suit, watch glinting under fluorescent lights, and an energy that felt almost electric. He had been orbiting the hospital for a week, meeting with specialists to ensure his grandmother received top-tier care. Rumors circulated about his arrival. Some nurses whispered he'd flown in on his private jet from Hong Kong. Others insisted it was London, but no one knew for sure. All that was clear was that William Hayes commanded attention the moment he appeared. "Dr. Bennett?" William asked in a low, refined voice, taking a step forward. "I'm William Hayes. Thank you for coming so quickly. My grandmother can be difficult to treat, especially these days. Everyone speaks highly of you, and I'm hoping you'll be the one who can connect with her." Olivia offered a reassuring smile. "I'm happy to help, Mr. Hayes. Your grandmother's case is quite delicate. Advanced Alzheimer's requires constant, specialized attention. I reviewed her records before coming up. The typical approach includes medication, structured routines, and lots of patience, especially with someone at her stage. My job is to provide her with the best possible quality of life, but it won't be easy." William nodded, glancing over at his grandmother. He paused, as if searching for the right words. "I've arranged for in-home care," he said, "but I've seen your credentials, your medical residency, your rotation with Alzheimer's patients, your thoroughness, and I've heard from the nurses how you go above and beyond. That's precisely what we need. I'm looking for a resident doctor who can live on site at our estate and oversee my grandmother's well-being around the clock." The unexpected offer hovered in the air. Olivia raised her eyebrows, surprised. Live-in doctor arrangements were not unheard of, but they were rare. Only families who could afford the very best and who had medical conditions requiring constant supervision opted for a full-time doctor at home. It was a promise of top-level medical care, but also demanded a total commitment from the physician. "This is a big responsibility," Olivia admitted, meeting William's intense gaze. "Your grandmother's condition will demand a structured routine, specialized cognitive exercises, a strict regimen of medications, and emotional support. I'm willing to do it, but I'll need your full cooperation and resources." William gave her a curt nod, something resolute in his eyes. "You'll have it. Anything my grandmother needs, anything you need to do your job, I'll take care of it." From that moment, it was clear their partnership would be unconventional. Within 48 hours, Olivia found herself in the back seat of a sleek SUV, traveling through the city outskirts toward the Hayes family estate. She felt like a whirlwind had swept her out of her normal life and into a realm of lavish mansions, gilded gates, and rumors that no detail was too small or too big for the Hayes name. The estate itself rose beyond thick iron gates, a luxurious sprawl of manicured lawns, sculpted hedges, and a winding driveway lined with flowering trees. Even the air felt different, fresher, crisper, almost as if it recognized old money and vast influence. Inside the main house, grand chandeliers lit a marble foyer that extended into multiple wings. The walls were adorned with paintings of Hayes' ancestors, all sporting the same proud posture and piercing gaze as William. Quiet staff members welcomed Olivia, guiding her toward a suite that would serve as both an office and a private bedroom. She noticed that everything had been prepared in a hurry but still reflected impeccable taste. Soft furnishings, fresh lilies, a mahogany desk stocked with thick medical journals, and a large window overlooking an enclosed courtyard. For Dr. Bennett, this marked the start of a delicate mission: to use every technique she'd learned and every ounce of compassion in her heart to stabilize Mrs. Hayes's declining mind. It would also be her first time living in close quarters with the family of a patient, something that both excited and unsettled her. She resolved to keep things strictly professional. She was here to heal and to help, a vow she made the day she entered medical school. But from the very first evening, that vow became complicated. On her way to check Mrs. Hayes's vital signs, Olivia paused in the corridor. Through a slightly open door, she overheard William's voice, calm yet tinged with frustration. "The board's pushing for an expansion," he was saying, presumably on a phone call. "But I can't leave my grandmother like this. Yes, I know the software launch is imminent. You think I want to watch everything from a distance? I need to be here right now." His voice faded into a sigh. Olivia took a careful step back, determined not to intrude. But something in William's tone struck her. She sensed a conflict inside him, a fierce desire to keep building the Hayes empire while being genuinely worried about his grandmother. It was as though the weight of the entire family name rested on his shoulders. He was only a few years older than Olivia, yet he had the entire corporate world expecting him to innovate, expand, and dominate. Not long after, William appeared in the hall, still wearing the same resigned expression. When he noticed Olivia, he seemed almost embarrassed, as if caught unguarded. She gave a polite nod. "Mr. Hayes, I was just checking your grandmother's sedation schedule. She's resting now, but in a little while I'd like to start her on a mild therapy, something called reminiscence therapy. It involves old photos, music she once loved, even scents or objects that might trigger familiar recollections." He forced a slight grin. "You can call me William, and that sounds perfect. I'll gather photo albums or anything she might recognize. My grandmother used to love the old jazz clubs downtown. Maybe I can find some recordings of her favorite bands." A small, fleeting warmth passed between them, a mutual understanding that they both wanted the same thing, to give Mrs. Hayes a chance at dignity and comfort in her twilight years. Outside, the evening's gentle breeze rustled the rose bushes as if the estate itself approved of their collaboration. For the first 2 weeks, Olivia focused entirely on her patient. She meticulously documented Mrs. Hayes's daily fluctuations, which times of day she was most lucid, which past memories made her anxious, and which routines soothed her best. The older woman responded little by little to Olivia's calm tone and reassuring presence. Early mornings sometimes brought a spark of recognition in her eyes, especially when they listened to the soft, soulful tunes of a bygone jazz era. Meanwhile, William's involvement could not be ignored. He'd often look on from across the room, observing Olivia's gentle coaxing, witnessing how his grandmother's eyes seemed less fearful. On some evenings after the day's therapy sessions ended, the two of them would sit in the estate's sprawling garden, a well-tended masterpiece filled with sculptures and water fountains. They'd talk about Mrs. Hayes's progress, strictly medical at first, but eventually those conversations meandered toward personal stories. William's global business expansions, Olivia's grueling medical rotations, how she barely had time to have a social life. Slowly, a bond, one Olivia did not foresee, began to form. She found herself less hesitant to tease William about his unstoppable business calls, and in turn, he dropped his guard, if only slightly. One night, as they walked along a path lit by discreet garden lamps, William mentioned how lonely it was to balance the company's demands and care for the only family he had left. Olivia listened, her heart softened by the subtle vulnerability in his eyes. She reminded herself it would be unwise to step beyond her role. She was here as a doctor. But there was something disarming in William's quiet confessions, something that resonated with her own experiences. She understood how it felt to be responsible for other people's well-being, how those responsibilities overshadowed personal desires. And no matter how many times she told herself to keep this strictly professional, a part of her heart was warming to him. Yet life has its ways of testing boundaries. Late one night, Mrs. Hayes woke in a fit of disorientation, calling out for help. Olivia rushed to calm her and found William already there, kneeling by his grandmother's bed, whispering in a voice tight with anxiety. In that moment, Olivia saw just how much fear lay beneath his polished exterior. He seemed like a young man struggling to hold on to the single most precious person from his childhood. When Mrs. Hayes finally went back to sleep, William remained on the floor, head bowed. Olivia softly reached out a hand to help him stand. As he rose, their eyes met, close enough to see the reflection of the room's dim lamp lighting. Without meaning to, he let his guard slip. Something unspoken hung in the air. Olivia's heart pounded, a flutter of unexpected emotion tightening her chest. Nothing was said, yet in that instant, everything was understood. Sometimes tragedy forges connections deeper than words can convey. Late afternoon sunlight filtered through the high windows of the Hayes estate, casting long shadows across the marble floors. As Olivia walked downstairs from her temporary bedroom, she passed by oil portraits of Hayes' ancestors in gilded frames, stern-faced men and elegant women who seemed to watch her every move. She felt an eerie mix of awe and curiosity, reminding her that this house, and its storied family, carried legacies both grand and secret. She stepped into the reading lounge, an ornate room filled with plush chairs and a towering bookshelf that spanned an entire wall. Shelves overflowed with volumes, each bearing evidence of the Hayes family's cultivated interests: literature, history, art, and countless accounts of philanthropic ventures. She was searching for a reference book on advanced Alzheimer's management, hoping the estate library might hold resources not readily available at the hospital. As she skimmed the spines of the books, her attention was pulled by William's voice from an adjoining room. He was on another important call, the low timbre of his words echoing off the walls. Although Olivia tried not to eavesdrop, She couldn't help catching fragments of frustration, mentions of postponed meetings, slipping stock prices, and a billion-dollar deal teetering on the edge of collapse if he didn't intervene soon. She tuned out the muffled conversation, continuing her search among the books. Eventually, she found an older medical text about Alzheimer's therapies. She flipped it open and discovered a dedication scrawled in delicate handwriting, presumably from William's mother to Helen Hayes. For Mother, so she never forgets how much we love her. The date was well over a decade old. A pang of sympathy lanced through Olivia's chest. Clearly, the family had known for a while that trouble was on the horizon, even if they hadn't spoken of it publicly. By the time Olivia emerged from the lounge, William had ended his call. He stood by the grand piano in the adjacent music room, shoulders tense as he stared at a polished set of keys. On top of the instrument lay a framed photograph, William's grandmother seated at that very piano, a younger William by her side, wearing a boyish grin that nearly reached his ears. Olivia paused in the doorway, not wanting to intrude, but William noticed her and offered a thin smile. "I was 8 in that photo," he said quietly, lifting it to examine it more closely. "Grandmother was teaching me scales. She insisted I learn classical pieces, but I was much more interested in pressing random keys to make weird melodies." Olivia took a cautious step inside. "She must have been proud of you, and it looks like you made her laugh often." William's fingers brushed across the photo's golden frame. "She was the rock of this house. My parents traveled for business so often that half the time I barely saw them. But grandmother was always here. I think I inherited my sense of loyalty from her." He set the photo down and turned to Olivia, his expression softening. "Speaking of which, how is she today?" "She had a moment of clarity this morning," Olivia replied, brightening. "I brought in an old quilt I found in the linen closet. She recognized the pattern. Apparently, it was sewn by her own grandmother when she was a girl. She even remembered a story about running through fields with it wrapped around her like a superhero cape." That's a good sign. Small breakthroughs, but important ones. A flicker of gratitude passed through William's eyes. "You're good for her. She's calmer. I can't thank you enough." Olivia smiled, but chose her words carefully. "I'm just doing my job. Your grandmother's the real hero here. She's fighting her illness every step of the way. We're just here to make that fight more manageable." She could sense the sincerity in William's gaze, something deeper than the usual gratitude she'd experienced from patients' families. A faint warmth spread in her chest, the undeniable feeling that they were forging a connection beyond professional obligations. Days turned into weeks, and the monotony of care took on a rhythm of its own. Mornings were spent administering medications, guiding Mrs. Hayes through memory exercises, and helping her with gentle stretches to maintain circulation. Afternoons were for therapy sessions, sometimes with music, sometimes with old photographs. The staff employed by the Hayes family was vast, but few were as intimately involved in Mrs. Hayes's care as Olivia. She felt a singular responsibility, ensuring that no detail was missed, no potential improvement left unexplored. During these weeks, William was ever present, though sometimes he vanished into his office for hours, connecting with overseas clients at odd times. The toll of balancing a multinational tech empire and being at his grandmother's bedside was evident in the darkening circles beneath his eyes. More than once, Olivia glimpsed him in the Manor Gardens, phone pressed to his ear, voice raised in frustration as he tried to salvage business deals. But he never let that frustration bleed into his time with Helen Hayes. When he joined Olivia for an evening check-in on his grandmother, he always donned a calm demeanor, clasping his grandmother's fragile hand with tenderness. One such night, with the windows cracked open to let in the mild breeze, Olivia administered Mrs. Hayes's evening medication. William lingered in the doorway, observing. After ensuring the older woman was comfortable, Olivia stepped outside the room. William followed, shutting the door gently behind them. "She's stable tonight," Olivia said, removing her stethoscope from around her neck. "I might try reintroducing some mild cognitive puzzles tomorrow." She used to do word searches, right? William nodded, lips curving slightly. Yes, the bigger the puzzle, the happier she was. Of course, that was years ago before... He trailed off. A hush fell. Neither felt ready to break it, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged, like the calm after a summer rain. Care for some tea? William asked finally. There's a lounge nearby the kitchen. One of the staff leaves a kettle on a warmer until midnight. Olivia hesitated, the professional part of her mind whispering caution. But she was exhausted, physically and emotionally. A cup of tea and a few minutes of easy conversation might soothe her nerves. Sure, she answered quietly. They found themselves in a small, cozy sitting room far from the more formal spaces of the estate. The furniture was comfortable and lived in, the decor simpler than the grand drawing rooms designed for entertaining. If anything, it felt almost normal. Two people sharing a quiet moment in the hush of late evening. Steam curled from her mug, and Olivia wrapped her hands around it, relishing its warmth. I'm not used to this kind of environment, she confessed, her eyes sweeping over the softly lit walls and tasteful but understated art. I grew up in a tiny apartment downtown. Even after all these weeks, being here still feels surreal. William leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I imagine it's overwhelming, but you handle it better than most. Some people come here and can't stop staring at the paintings and sculptures. Or they grow resentful and assume I must be arrogant because of, well, everything. Olivia caught the flicker of unease crossing his face. You don't act arrogant, she said. You act responsible, serious, maybe even lonely at times. She had no idea why the last word came out so candidly, but she didn't regret it. A slow, sad smile tugged at the corner of William's mouth. He stared down at his tea. Loneliness comes with the job description, I suppose. When you inherit an empire at a young age, everyone sees a target on your back or an opportunity to latch onto. There are times I've wondered if anyone can ever genuinely want to be close to me for reasons that aren't about the money. Olivia's heart contracted at the vulnerability in his eyes. She recognized that look. It was the same one she saw in the hospital sometimes, on patients who felt powerless. I can't speak for everyone, she began softly, but not all of us see you that way, William. His eyes flicked up to meet hers. I know. You've never looked at me like that. And that's one of the reasons I find myself drawn to you. The words lingered between them, amplified by the silence of the house. Her pulse fluttered. She tried to find a cool, collected response, but all that came out was a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Before she could articulate a response, a distant ring came from William's phone on the table, a glaring intrusion, summoning him back into the world of urgent business calls. He exhaled, apologetic. I'm sorry. That's an international line I've been waiting on. I should take this. It's fine, Olivia managed to say. Duty calls. He stepped out to handle the conversation. The door to the small lounge clicked shut behind him, leaving her alone with the echo of his confession and her racing thoughts. She looked at the half-finished mug of tea, the steam long since faded, and realized her hands were still trembling slightly. All her instincts screamed caution. Getting personally involved with a patient's family was not just taboo, it was downright dangerous, professionally and personally. Yet the feeling that coursed through her veins was undeniable. Connection. In William's presence, she felt recognized and seen, not just as a caregiver or a physician, but as a human being. And from the way he looked at her, she suspected the feeling was mutual. Still, she couldn't ignore the complexities, couldn't ignore the lines she would be crossing, or the heartbreak that might come from stepping into the spotlight of William's high-stakes life. When William returned, his face was steeled with business-like resolve. Another crisis averted, or perhaps a new fire to extinguish halfway around the globe. I'll need to fly overseas in a week or two, he said, voice subdued. Major contract signing. I might be gone for about a month. Will you look after grandmother while I'm away?" Olivia swallowed the knot in her throat and nodded. "Of course," she said. "I promise I'll take good care of her." He managed a grateful smile. "Thank you for everything, Olivia." They didn't speak of the deeper confession that had just passed between them, but the fragile tension, somewhere between emotional intimacy and professional distance, lay thick in the air. Both felt the unspoken possibility that if he indeed left for a month, something significant might shift between them in that span. Perhaps the slow burn they'd been flirting with would cool into nothing. Or perhaps the longing would grow stronger, magnified by absence. Neither could predict which way their tangled feelings would go, but they both knew life in the Hayes estate was changing, as ephemeral as the steam rising from a cup of tea left to sit in the hush of a midnight conversation. For the next few days, Olivia threw herself into a rigorous routine, focusing her energy on stabilizing Mrs. Hayes's health. She fine-tuned medication schedules, consulted with a nutritionist, and coordinated with a physical therapist who visited the estate twice a week. The bustle of professional obligations provided a welcome distraction from the growing tension she felt whenever William's gaze lingered on her. She tried to rationalize the situation at every opportunity. You're here to care for his grandmother, not to get tangled in complicated feelings. In quieter moments, though, the memory of that late-night conversation, of William quietly admitting he was drawn to her, crept back into her mind. Sometimes, as she recorded Mrs. Hayes's vitals in the estate's private clinic, she'd catch her own reflection in the stainless steel surfaces and notice the faintest flush on her cheeks. She was accustomed to clinical detachment, to focusing on a patient's needs without letting emotions in. Yet here, in this palatial and private environment, her usual boundaries felt dangerously porous. Mrs. Hayes's condition, meanwhile, showed modest but encouraging signs of improvement. The therapy sessions appeared to spark new moments of clarity. One day, Olivia brought an old radio into the sunroom and tuned it to a jazz station. Almost immediately, Mrs. Hayes's hand tapped in time to the slow, brassy tempo. She whispered a few lines of a tune that might have once been her favorite. Olivia, enthralled, scribbled notes. Patient recognized melody. Patient attempted partial lyrics. When the music session ended, Mrs. Hayes turned her gaze on Olivia with surprising sharpness. "You take good care of me, dear," she said with a gentle smile, the first Olivia had ever seen from her. Olivia crouched beside the wheelchair, returning the smile. "I do my best, Mrs. Hayes," she replied softly. The older woman's expression clouded with a momentary flicker of confusion. "Where's William?" she asked, voice trembling. "Has he gone away again?" Olivia's chest tightened. "He's here in the house," she soothed, placing a comforting hand over the woman's frail fingers. "He'll come by to see you soon." She didn't want to lie, yet the truth was complicated. Over the last week, William's schedule had grown more frantic than ever. Phone calls dragged late into the night, and he'd vanish into the city for urgent business meetings. Rumors circulated among the household staff that he was finalizing his travel itinerary to Asia, with a possible detour to Europe immediately after. They'd gather in hushed corners, exchanging worried speculation that the young heir's absence could stretch longer than a month. For Olivia, that possibility felt strangely disconcerting. Each day that passed reminded her of how fleeting the small moments they shared truly were. Quiet conversation over tea, fleeting smiles in the corridor, a soft, tension-filled hush that settled whenever they found themselves alone. One evening, after an especially long shift, Olivia returned to her suite and discovered a small card slipped beneath the door. Intrigued, she picked it up. In precise, elegant handwriting, it read, "Dinner, 8 p.m. The Atrium Dining Room. William." She let out a slow breath. The mansion boasted multiple dining areas, formal ballrooms, smaller breakfast nooks, even a glass-roofed garden space perched near the estate's south wing. But the atrium dining room, she'd been told, was used only for intimate family gatherings, not for public entertaining. She felt her heart flutter with a mix of curiosity and hesitation. Was this a business courtesy? A personal invitation? Promptly at 8, she approached the ornate double doors of the atrium. A staff member quietly opened them, and Olivia entered to find a table set for two amid lush greenery and a soft overhead glow filtering through tinted glass. The entire space felt alive, filled with potted tropical plants, subtle floral scents, and the distant sounds of water flowing in a decorative fountain. At the center of it all stood William, wearing a tailored charcoal suit and a tentative smile. "Dr. Bennett," he said, voice warm. "Thank you for coming." She dipped her head, feeling suddenly self-conscious in her simple blouse and skirt, a far cry from the glamorous wardrobe that seemed to match the estate's grandeur. "You didn't have to go to this trouble," she murmured, eyeing the fine place settings. "I thought perhaps you'd want a quick meeting to discuss your grandmother's treatment plan." His smile broadened. "We can talk about that too, of course, but I'd hoped to steal a moment of normalcy before I leave." Gesturing to a seat, he added, "Please, sit." They settled across from each other, candlelight casting flickering shadows on the tablecloth. A discreet server poured water and wine, then vanished, leaving them in an intimate hush. For a moment, Olivia felt as if she'd stepped out of her own life. She wasn't in the middle of medical rounds or scanning patient charts. She was simply there, with him. He cleared his throat, perhaps sensing her unease. "I suppose I've been absent. With the new software rollout, last-minute partner negotiations, and the overseas trip, it's been chaotic, but the hardest part is leaving grandmother in this state." "She'll be in good hands," Olivia reassured, folding her hands in her lap. "We've established a routine. The nurse helps at night, and I'm here to monitor her day-to-day condition. I promise I'll keep you updated with everything." He nodded gratefully. "I know you will." After a pause, he reached into his suit pocket and pulled out an old photograph. He turned it so Olivia could see. It was a snapshot of him, around 10 years old, grinning widely as he stood next to Mrs. Hayes. They were at what looked like a county fair, popcorn and candy apples behind them. "I found this in a drawer earlier today," he said. "I barely remember that day, but she does. Or she did anyway, back when her mind was clearer. I can't bear the thought of her slipping away while I'm gone." The anxiety in his voice was palpable. Olivia reached across the table on impulse, placing her hand gently on his. "She's not alone," she promised, voice low. "I'll make sure every day counts for her, in whatever small ways I can." His grip tightened slightly around her fingers. She felt the warmth radiating from his skin and realized just how natural, how right it felt to offer reassurance, something that was more than just professional comfort. He exhaled, eyes meeting hers, gratitude and something else flickering in their depths. They spoke quietly through dinner, and the conversation roamed from hospital anecdotes to dreams for the future. William confessed that beneath his polished business demeanor, he still harbored an old aspiration to backpack through remote parts of the world, free from corporate responsibilities, if only for a month. Olivia, for her part, admitted how she'd once dreamed of opening a small clinic in an underprivileged area of the city, providing affordable care. "You should," he encouraged, leaning forward as dessert arrived. "We've got philanthropic arms in the company. Grant programs, volunteer initiatives. Maybe once my grandmother is stable, we can explore something together." The word "together" drew a shy smile from Olivia. "I'd like that," she admitted, lightly tapping the edge of her fork against the plate. Time slipped away, and soon they realized it was nearly midnight, the candles low and the soft lighting even gentler. The server had returned once or twice with polite offers to clear the table, only to vanish again with professional discretion. At last, William stood, and as Olivia rose from her chair, he walked her out of the atrium into a corridor only partially lit by the moon that filtered through tall windows. "Thank you for tonight," he said quietly. "I know this is unusual, and I don't want to make things more complicated for you." Olivia's heart pounded. She understood his subtext perfectly. They both wrestled with the same conflict. The intense attraction that danced at the edges of every conversation weighed against their responsibilities to each other and to Helen Hayes. They stood in the hallway, the hush of the sleeping estate enveloping them. "I care about your grandmother," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "and I'm deeply invested in her well-being." "I know," William said, stepping just a fraction closer. She swallowed. "And She searched for a carefully reasoned phrase, but only found honesty. "I'm starting to care about you too." For a moment the only sounds were the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant chirping of crickets outside. He reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "I feel the same," he murmured. Her mind spun with the implications, crossing professional boundaries, the ethical tightrope, the possibility of heartbreak if they rushed in. But as his hand lingered near her cheek, that swirl of thoughts melted into something simpler, an undeniable sense of closeness, the magnetic pull of two people who had found solace in each other through shared worry and tireless dedication. Neither leaned in for a kiss, though the tension of the moment hovered on the edge of possibility. Instead, William took a slow breath, his eyes drifting to the floor before he looked at her again. "I'll be gone for a month, maybe longer," he reminded her. "All I ask is, think about us, about what we could be once I return." She pressed her lips together, steadying the flutter in her chest. "Take the time you need to handle your business. I'll watch over Mrs. Hayes. And, well, we can see where things stand after that." They exchanged a silent understanding, one laced with longing and fear of the unknown. Then, with a soft smile, William turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. Olivia stood rooted in place, heart thumping, aware that she had made a choice, or perhaps it had been made for her by forces beyond logic. There was no going back to the simple, tidy lines that separated doctor from family. Not anymore. As she finally found the strength to head toward her suite, she heard the distant clock in the foyer chime the hour. Time was moving forward as it always did, but for the first time in a long while, Olivia felt a flicker of hope that maybe, in caring for Mrs. Hayes, she had also stumbled upon a chance to care for her own heart. The morning William flew out, the sky was overcast, a perfect reflection of the heaviness Olivia felt in her chest as she made her way through the estate's sprawling corridors. A hush had settled over the staff. They all knew Mr. Hayes was leaving on urgent business. Suitcases were discreetly escorted to the waiting SUV, a black car with tinted windows idling near the front entrance. Nobody spoke much, and even the usual polite morning greetings seemed muted, as though everyone worried that the slightest noise might unbalance the fragile calm that had formed in recent weeks. Near the entry hall, William stood in a tailored suit, carefully checking his phone. His hair was neatly combed, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed his anxiety. An overseas trip wasn't anything new for him. He was always traveling to meet investors or sign deals. Yet this departure felt different, weightier. He glanced up, catching Olivia's gaze across the foyer. With a nod, he set the phone aside and strode over to her. "Everything's set with grandmother," she assured him softly. "Her vitals are stable, and we've adjusted her medication schedule. The new therapy plan should help keep her mind active. I'll send you updates every day if you'd like." William exhaled with a tight smile, relief momentarily flickering in his eyes. "That means more to me than you know. I hate leaving her like this, but this business deal can't be ignored." A brief silence fell between them as staff members passed by, carefully maneuvering around the final pieces of luggage. "Olivia, about last night," he began, lowering his voice. "I meant everything I said." She felt her heart skip a beat. Memories of the intimate dinner in the atrium flooded her mind, his warm hand over hers, the lingering confession between them. "I did too," she replied, equally hushed. "But let's take it slow. We'll see where we stand when you return." William nodded, though his expression looked torn, as if he wanted to say more. In the end, he lifted her hand gently and pressed a soft kiss to her knuckles, a gesture that left her breath unsteady. Before the moment could deepen into something else, he pulled away, his polite mask slipping back into place. The driver cleared his throat, and William gave Olivia one final, meaningful glance before stepping outside, the front doors swinging shut behind him. The estate felt emptier without William, yet Olivia's workload was as demanding as ever. Each day started at dawn, checking Mrs. Hayes's glucose levels, adjusting her medication routine as needed. Then came the mental exercises, simple word associations or recollections from old photographs. Progress was slow but measurable. Mrs. Hayes recognized certain staff members more readily, and she occasionally responded to questions about her past with surprising clarity. Olivia scribbled notes into the official binder she kept in the estate's private clinic. She cross-referenced them with older medical records and scanned any unusual changes to share with the lead neurologist downtown. It was the type of thorough, detail-oriented approach that had made her stand out in residency. And with William away, she found herself throwing even more of her energy into patient care, as though she could subdue her restlessness by focusing on tasks at hand. But in the quiet moments, those odd pockets of time when she waited for test results or accompanied Mrs. Hayes on slow walks around the garden, Olivia's thoughts inevitably strayed to William. She wondered if he'd already settled into a faraway hotel suite in Hong Kong or Singapore, if he was negotiating deals in boardrooms so high that they sliced through the city's skyline. The occasional text updates he sent were short but caring. "Grandmother okay? I'm fine. Missing home." It made her heart twist with longing for something she couldn't quite name. About 2 weeks into William's absence, Olivia began noticing subtle changes in her own routine, sleep disturbances, random bouts of nausea in the morning that she initially chalked up to stress. She had no time to dwell on it, rushing from one therapy session to another, but by the end of each day she found herself drained in a way that went beyond normal exhaustion. One morning, the smell of coffee in the estate's kitchen turned her stomach so violently that she had to flee to the nearest restroom. Leaning over the sink, trying to catch her breath, she realized she hadn't had a normal appetite in days. A creeping suspicion formed at the back of her mind, something she tried to swat away with logic. It couldn't be that. It was too soon, too unexpected. And yet... Later that evening, after Mrs. Hayes had drifted off to sleep, Olivia returned to her suite and locked the door. She paced back and forth on the plush carpet, quietly berating herself for overreacting, for being melodramatic. But the truth wouldn't budge. Her period was late, and the small changes in her body were consistent with a possibility she couldn't ignore. She forced herself to run through the facts clinically, almost as if counseling another patient. "You've been intimate with William only once," she reminded herself, "but it was a night you both said you wanted, and you didn't think to be..." She closed her eyes and exhaled. They'd both been swept up in the emotional whirlwind that followed one of Mrs. Hayes's particularly bad days. A moment of comfort had led to a mutual, powerful release of pent-up feeling, and in that moment, neither of them had paused to consider the consequences. Wrestling with her professional instincts, Olivia decided she needed solid confirmation. She quietly arranged for a lab test, anonymously processed at the hospital where her friend worked. She couldn't just stroll into a pharmacy and pick up a test without risking a staff member from the estate or the hospital seeing her. By the next afternoon, the result arrived in a succinct text message from her trusted colleague. "Positive. Let's talk." Olivia sank into the nearest chair, phone clutched in a white-knuckled grip. A wave of conflicting emotions hit her: shock, disbelief, and beneath it all, a small, undeniable spark of something else, maybe hope or fear, or both. She was pregnant. with William Hayes's child. Her thoughts swirled. Should I call him right now? But he was continents away, dealing with a high-stakes negotiation that might fall apart if he lost focus. One phone call from her could derail everything, yet the idea of keeping such news from him felt wrong. He had every right to know. She was a doctor, for heaven's sake. Logic told her that the father needed to be part of this conversation. Still, the reality of telling him by phone, in the midst of a major international contract, seemed cruelly timed. Over the next few days, Olivia walked around in a silent daze, balancing her duties with an enormous secret weighing on her shoulders. She managed Mrs. Hayes's therapy with unwavering poise, encouraging gentle outdoor strolls under the canopy of oak trees. On some afternoons, she helped the older woman pot small seedlings in the greenhouse, an activity that seemed to spark a sense of calm in the elder Hayes. Despite these successes, Olivia's own turmoil grew. She caught herself daydreaming about how William might react. Would he be angry? Alarmed? Or would he be happy? The staff began to notice Olivia's pallor and occasional rushing trips to the bathroom. One of the senior nurses pulled her aside, placing a gentle hand on her arm. "Dr. Bennett, are you all right? You're pale. You look like you might have a fever." Forcing a reassuring smile, Olivia insisted she was just overworked. She didn't miss the nurse's skeptical look. In such an intimate household setting, secrets rarely stayed hidden for long. And she couldn't risk the rumor mill swirling before she'd even told William himself. One rainy evening, Olivia found herself in Mrs. Hayes's study, combing through old records that might help spark deeper recollections. Stacks of photographs and mementos were spread out on a table. Storm clouds outside rattled the window panes, giving the room a dim, bluish cast in the fading light. Mrs. Hayes dozed peacefully in a nearby armchair, the rhythmic patter of rain lulling her into slumber. Her phone buzzed, William's name glowing on the screen. It was a video call. Heart pounding, Olivia stepped into the hallway for privacy. She answered to see his face, slightly pixelated by a weak connection, but still unmistakably him. The lines of fatigue were evident around his eyes, but he offered a genuine, if weary, smile. "Sorry it's taken me so long," he said, voice echoing in the corridor. "Things here have been intense. How's grandmother?" "She's showing small improvements," Olivia replied, leaning against the wall. She tried to keep her tone neutral, but inside she felt a dizzying swirl of emotion. "We've added a few new exercises. She's responding well to them." William nodded, relief etched into his features. "Thank you. Really. I know I say it all the time, but you're incredible. I don't know what I'd do without you." A hard lump formed in Olivia's throat. She wanted to tell him about the baby right then, but the moment felt wrong. She could see a dozen people milling behind him in suits, glimpses of bustling city lights through tall windows. This was not the calm, intimate setting to drop life-altering news. She clenched her free hand at her side, struggling to keep her voice steady. "I miss you being here," she admitted carefully, "and so does your grandmother, but I understand your obligations." An odd flicker crossed William's face, as though he sensed a shift in her voice. "I miss you too," he said softly. Then a voice in the background called his name. He glanced away, apologetic. I have to go. Another meeting. But let's talk soon properly, I promise, and tell grandmother I love her." "Of course," Olivia murmured. "Take care." As the call ended, she stood there, phone still in hand, the patter of rain intensifying. She pressed a palm gently to her lower abdomen, her mind spinning with what felt like 1,000 questions. How would he react to the life now growing inside her? Would it pull them closer together, or tear them apart? She returned to the study where Mrs. Hayes stirred faintly in her chair, blinking at the darkness gathering outside. Olivia kneeled to help her up. Once the older woman was steady, Olivia set aside the photos and guided her out of the room. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil in her heart, restless, churning, and unpredictable. By the next morning, Olivia had made up her mind. She would wait for William's return, or at least for a calmer moment, to share this profound news face to face. She owed him that much, and perhaps owed it to herself, too. For now, she'd continue her work as diligently as ever, hiding the subtle changes in her own body while every day the knowledge of the child grew a little stronger, a little clearer in her mind. A restless, hazy dawn ushered in a day that felt heavier than usual at the Hayes estate. Dark clouds hovered at the horizon, threatening rain even though the forecast predicted clear skies. Olivia awoke with a jolt, her alarm vibrating softly on the nightstand, and pressed her hand to her abdomen almost reflexively. Although she was only a few weeks along, the knowledge of her pregnancy weighed on her every moment. She steadied her breathing, willing herself to stay composed for Mrs. Hayes's sake. Before heading to the main house, she forced down a few crackers, one of the only foods that settled her morning queasiness. She studied her reflection in the mirror, searching for any obvious changes. No visible bump yet, but her face looked paler. Her eyes held a glimmer of tension, a mix of excitement and dread about what lay ahead. One day at a time, she reminded herself. Focus on what you can control. She found Mrs. Hayes in the sunroom, seated in her wheelchair beside a wide window that overlooked the garden. The older woman watched the estate grounds with a vacant gaze, occasionally blinking as if trying to recall a dream. Soft classical music played from a small speaker, a gentle piece that Olivia had introduced during their therapy sessions. A faint swirl of dust motes danced in the filtered morning light, casting the room in a serene, otherworldly glow. "Good morning, Mrs. Hayes," Olivia said, forcing a bright smile even as her stomach churned. "How are we feeling today?" Mrs. Hayes turned her head slowly. There was a flicker of recognition. "The flowers," she murmured, nodding at the blooms outside. "They look lovely this year." "That they do," Olivia agreed, relieved to see a spark of clarity. "Shall we move you closer to the window so you can watch the gardeners trim the hedges?" A faint but genuine smile curled across Mrs. Hayes's lips. "Yes, dear." Carefully, Olivia maneuvered the wheelchair closer. A quiet nurse, Carmen, stepped in to help, adjusting pillows behind Mrs. Hayes's back so she could comfortably sit upright. Meanwhile, Olivia readied a short list of potential activities for the day. Light physical therapy, a puzzle to help with cognitive recall, and perhaps some gentle music therapy in the afternoon. Although repetitive, these sessions were vital for Mrs. Hayes, who needed constant mental stimulation to stave off the worst effects of her Alzheimer's. Outside, the skies remained moody, but no rainfall came. The staff was unusually subdued, going about their tasks with hushed efficiency. It seemed everyone felt William's absence acutely. A few of the housekeepers asked Olivia if she had any word on Mr. Hayes's return. They'd grown fond of the younger master of the house, his generosity, his quiet ways, much more than they'd ever spoken of William's parents, who were hardly around. "He's busy overseas," Olivia would say politely, "finalizing some deals. He'll come back when everything is settled." Her words were calm, but inside she felt a pang each time she spoke them, not knowing exactly when William would walk through those doors again. Mid-morning arrived with an unexpected phone call from the security gate. The nurse who answered passed the phone to Olivia, eyes filled with curiosity. "Dr. Bennett, there's someone here asking for you," she explained. "Says his name is Dr. Morgan from the city hospital." A jolt of alarm rushed through Olivia. Dr. Morgan? She pictured her old mentor from her residency and the colleague who had discreetly helped process her lab results. "I'll take it in the study," she said, trying to maintain a level tone. In the small private study, a tranquil room usually reserved for reading, Olivia picked up the nearest phone. "Dr. Morgan?" she greeted softly, voice echoing in the quiet. "You're at the gate? Everything all right?" A slightly nervous chuckle came through the line. Yes, sorry to barge in on your territory. I'm driving through the area and realized I should bring you a few items. Vitamins, resources about prenatal nutrition, that kind of thing. I also wanted to see how you were holding up." Olivia's stomach dropped. Dr. Morgan, this isn't exactly a public matter. The staff might ask questions if you show up. Couldn't we have met in the city?" He hesitated. "I'm sorry if this is inconvenient, but I'm already out front. I told security I was delivering some medical documents. Don't worry, I'll be discreet. I just want to make sure you're taking care of yourself, given your situation. First trimester can be rough, especially for someone working such long hours." The concern in his voice disarmed her irritation. She rubbed her temples, grappling with the risk of letting him in, but she appreciated the gesture. Her friend was only trying to help. "Okay," she agreed, trying to sound calm, "but keep the explanation vague. I'm not ready for anyone to know yet." Within 10 minutes, Dr. Morgan was escorted into the estate, stepping into the lavish foyer with a slight air of awe, clearly a far cry from the hospital corridors they both knew. He was a middle-aged man with a kindly face, carrying a plain brown bag in one hand and a small stack of pamphlets in the other. Olivia met him near the entrance to the private clinic, where she often examined Mrs. Hayes. "You've, found yourself in quite the place," he said gently, glancing around at the polished marble floors. "How are you handling it all?" She lowered her voice, guiding him into a quiet examination room. "I'm trying my best," she admitted. "Some days are fine, but the morning sickness has started hitting me at random times, and the stress, not exactly ideal." He nodded sympathetically. "That's natural, especially if you're working around the clock." "Here," he said, handing her the brown bag. Inside were prenatal vitamins, anti-nausea lozenges, and a few packets of nutritional shakes. "These might help. Just be careful with your meal schedule. Small, frequent meals if you can. Don't skip breakfast. And as soon as you can, schedule a formal prenatal appointment with an OB. I can make recommendations if you like." Olivia exhaled, touched by his kindness. "Thank you. This means more than you know. I don't have anyone else to confide in about this right now." He set a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone, Olivia. I know you're a brilliant doctor, but even you need support sometimes. If the father—" He trailed off, catching her pained expression. "He's not aware, is he?" She shook her head slowly. "Not yet. He's out of the country, running a massive deal that can't fall apart. I don't want to derail him with this news over the phone." Dr. Morgan studied her, eyebrows creased in concern. "I understand. But don't wait too long, okay? It's his right to know, and you deserve help, emotional and physical. Carrying a secret like this can be a strain, and stress isn't good for the baby or you." Before Olivia could respond, the nurse, Carmen, walked in, clearing her throat. Her expression was politely curious. "Dr. Bennett, Mrs. Hayes is awake and asking for you. She's a bit agitated." Olivia blinked, quickly slipping the bag behind a piece of medical equipment so Carmen wouldn't notice. She nodded. "Thanks, Carmen. I'll be right there." Turning to Dr. Morgan, she offered a quick, grateful smile. "I appreciate this. Sorry to rush, but—" He waved a hand. "Go, help your patient. I'll see myself out. And remember to call if you need me anytime." With that, Olivia hurried off. By the time she reached Mrs. Hayes's suite, she found the older woman breathing rapidly, her expression tinged with confusion as she fiddled nervously with the blanket on her lap. Carmen stood nearby, attempting to soothe her. "There you are," Mrs. Hayes said, voice quivering. "I had the strangest dream. Where is my grandson? Where is William?" Olivia crouched to meet her eye level. "He's still away on business, Mrs. Hayes," she explained gently, "but I can call him if you like, or we can record a message." Mrs. Hayes squeezed her eyes shut. "I just want to see him. I feel like I'm losing my mind. I look at the clock and can't remember what day it is." "It's Tuesday," Olivia said softly, placing a comforting hand over the older woman's frail fingers. "We're going to do some grounding exercises. Remember the big oak tree outside your window? We can describe it together, talk about its leaves and branches. It might help you stay in the moment." Mrs. Hayes forced a nod, though tears clung to her lashes. "Yes, "Yes, that's fine." Patiently, Olivia guided her through a series of questions. What season is it? What do the leaves look like? How tall is the tree? Bit by bit, the color returned to Mrs. Hayes's cheeks, and her breathing slowed to a steadier rhythm. Even so, the older woman seemed subdued. It was as if, deep down, she understood something wasn't right, but couldn't fully articulate it. Her mind was trying to cling to what stability remained, while the disease slowly chipped away at her memories. For Olivia, the session was a stark reminder that Alzheimer's care could be unpredictable. Good days could become bad days in an instant. With William gone, the emotional weight seemed heavier on Mrs. Hayes, and ironically, Olivia felt the same restlessness, longing for William's reassuring presence in the house. She ached to hear his voice, to share the monumental secret she carried, but she also dreaded how that conversation might change everything. A few hours later, while Mrs. Hayes napped, Olivia allowed herself a short break. She retreated to her suite, rummaged through the discreet brown bag Dr. Morgan had left, and took one of the prenatal vitamins. Then she sank onto the edge of her bed, phone in hand, scrolling through William's brief text messages from the last few days. Each one was a small lifeline, a reminder that he still cared, even from across the ocean. She typed out a message of her own, her fingers hovering above the screen. "I hope you're well. Mrs. Hayes misses you a lot. I do too." After a moment's hesitation, she hit send, heart thudding. It was the closest she could come to admitting how badly she wanted him back, how every day felt heavier without him. Night fell over the estate, bringing a stiff wind that rattled the windows. Olivia remained awake, reading medical journals to distract herself from the swirl of emotions. Every so often she'd catch her reflection on the tablet's dark screen, a reminder of her reality. She was carrying the next heir to the Hayes name, the child of the man who'd pulled her heart into complicated, uncharted territory. Outside, a lone security lamp illuminated the driveway, empty but for the soft silhouettes of garden statues. Somewhere, she thought, William is stepping off a plane or entering another negotiation, oblivious to how much life has changed back here at home. She wondered, when he does find out, will he look at me with regret or with love? Tucking away her tablet, she whispered a silent prayer that whatever the future brought, the two of them could face it, together. But for now, the quiet hush of the estate offered no answers, only the steady hum of the air conditioning and the distant, melancholic rustle of leaves. Morning light stretched thin rays across the marble floors of the Hayes estate as Olivia hurried through the corridor, a clipboard held tightly in her arms. She had stayed up until nearly 2 a.m. reviewing Mrs. Hayes's progress. But exhaustion wasn't the only thing tightening her chest. Her pregnancy weighed on her mind like a secret she could barely contain. Downstairs, she found the household staff in discreet discussion. A hush fell over them as she approached, but she sensed they'd been talking about William's prolonged absence. Several employees gave her sympathetic glances. They'd noticed how closely she worked with him before he left and likely assumed she missed him just as much as his grandmother did. They had no idea just how complicated the situation truly was. "Dr. Bennett," called Carmen, the nurse intercepting Olivia as she entered the foyer. "Mrs. Hayes had a restless night. She's awake now, pacing the room, asking for William again. She keeps saying he's been gone too long." Olivia exhaled. "All right, I'll see what I can do. Could you bring her medication schedule to the clinic? I'd like to review if any changes might help her rest better." Carmen nodded, concern etched on her face. "Of course." Moments later, Olivia stepped into Mrs. Hayes's private sitting area, a warm space with pastel drapes and comfortable seating. The older woman wore a silk robe, her frail hands trembling against the armrests of a chair. Yet there was a sudden alertness in her gaze. "Dr. Bennett?" Mrs. Hayes said in a small, pleading voice. "Where is my grandson? It's been so long." Olivia approached gently, crouching to meet Mrs. Hayes's eyes. He's handling important business abroad, Mrs. Hayes. He's safe, I promise. Sometimes these trips take longer than expected. Mrs. Hayes closed her eyes, a tear escaping. I keep waking up thinking I hear him in the hallway, but then it's just echoes. I'm frightened. Sometimes I can't remember his face. The vulnerability struck Olivia hard. Despite the older woman's condition, she still carried the heartbreak of longing for her loved one. "I'm sure he'll return soon," Olivia said, voice soft. "We can look at photos if you'd like, or maybe listen to some of his favorite music. That might help you feel closer to him." Mrs. Hayes swallowed and nodded, tears glistening. A moment passed in silence. Then her expression shifted and she peered at Olivia more closely. "My dear," she ventured, "you look pale. Are you feeling all right?" A startled pang shot through Olivia. For a second, she worried if the older woman was perceptive enough to guess the truth. She forced a smile. "I'm fine, Mrs. Hayes. Just a bit tired from all the late nights. Let's focus on you, okay?" With a slight tilt of her head, Mrs. Hayes seemed to accept the answer, though her curious expression lingered. During the afternoon therapy session, Olivia laid out stacks of photos on a low table. Many showed William at different ages: childhood birthdays, teenage milestones, his early days at the university. Each time Mrs. Hayes recognized a face, she brightened, as though grasping a fragment of reality she feared losing. They paused on a photo of William wearing an academic robe, beaming after receiving an honorary degree. Mrs. Hayes tapped a trembling finger on the snapshot. "I always thought he'd go into law or medicine, but he chose technology, and he excelled. Maybe too much. It devoured him." Olivia hesitated. "What do you mean?" The older woman sighed. "The bigger the empire he built, the more he distanced himself, traveling, investing, expanding. This house fell silent. I don't blame him, of course. He's providing for our legacy. But sometimes I wish I could have had him around to be just my grandson for a while." Olivia's throat tightened at the unspoken parallels. William was a man defined by responsibility, just as she felt forced to be in her medical role and now in her unexpected pregnancy. Perhaps, she wondered, they were both struggling to discover who they could be beneath the weight of expectations. Midway through the session, Olivia's phone buzzed. She saw William's name flash on the screen and immediately excused herself. Stepping into the corridor, she answered in a hushed tone. "William?" His voice came strained through the speaker. "Olivia, hi, how are you? How's grandmother?" She pressed a hand to her chest, relief washing over her. Just hearing his voice felt like a soothing balm. "We miss you. She's been asking for you a lot, having trouble sleeping. Are you close to finishing your business?" He sighed. "It's more complicated than I thought. I'm finalizing one merger here, then I have to jump across the globe to sign off on another project. If I don't see it through personally, it might fall apart, but I promise I'm doing everything I can to get back." The words hit her like a pang of disappointment. She caught herself before her emotion bled too clearly into her response. "I understand. Really, I do." Silence stretched. Olivia realized she was pressing a protective hand over her lower abdomen, as if shielding the secret that pulsed there. She debated telling him right this second, but she heard voices in the background on his end. Business associates, perhaps. This wasn't the right context to drop such a life-altering revelation. "How are you doing?" he asked at length. "You sound tired." She swallowed. "Just busy. I'm juggling a lot, but everything's under control." He seemed to hear the undercurrent in her voice. "If there's something on your mind, you can tell me," he murmured more softly. "You know that, right?" Her resolve threatened to crumble. She wanted to say, "I'm pregnant with your child. My entire life feels upside down." But the words refused to leave her lips. Instead, she forced a small, hollow laugh. "I know. Let's talk when you're back. It'll be easier face to face." A resigned pause. "All right. But if anything changes or if you need me, please call, day or night." "I will," she said quietly, tears burning the back of her eyes. "Take care, William." They ended the call and she leaned against the wall, fighting the swirl of relief and heartbreak. He should know, her conscience berated, but her fear drowned out reason, fear that a phone call across continents would cheapen the magnitude of this news, or that he might respond with shock or anger that could fracture their fragile bond. Returning to Mrs. Hayes, Olivia found the older woman watching her with mild curiosity. "Was that William?" she asked. Olivia nodded, pasting on a reassuring smile. "Yes, he's fine, just very busy. He sends his love." Mrs. Hayes let out a tired laugh. "Busy is his default state. Please, remind him not to forget the simple joys, will you?" If only Olivia could assure him of that personally, she thought. But for now, she refocused on the task at hand. They finished the photo review, and Mrs. Hayes seemed calmer for a time. By late afternoon, she dozed off in her chair, a small but contented smile lingering on her face. As evening approached, Olivia retreated to her suite, her head spinning. She checked the time and realized Dr. Morgan had asked her to drop by the hospital soon for an initial prenatal checkup. She'd been pushing it off, anxious about letting the truth surface. Yet her body wouldn't allow her to deny it much longer. Her morning sickness had worsened, and she needed professional guidance. That night, once Mrs. Hayes was asleep and the estate had quieted, Olivia drove her modest sedan into the city. She told the night staff she had errands to run and might be back late. The drive felt surreal, leaving behind the grand gates of the Hayes mansion and weaving through bustling streets that reminded her of her old life when she was just Olivia Bennett, an ambitious resident doctor with no ties to unimaginable wealth or complicated romances. At the hospital, Dr. Morgan greeted her with a comforting smile in a small, private exam room. He went through standard prenatal questions, then checked her vitals and ordered a routine ultrasound, even though it was still early in her pregnancy. Olivia watched the fuzzy image on the monitor with a mix of astonishment and anxiety, heart pounding at every flicker of light. "All looks normal for this stage," Dr. Morgan assured, smiling at her. "You'll want to set up consistent visits, probably every month at this point, just to track your progress." She nodded, swallowing. "Thank you. I appreciate your discretion." He ushered her out with a gentle pat on the shoulder. "You know where to find me if you need anything. And please, try to rest. Stress is no friend to you or the baby." Back in the estate's driveway, close to midnight, the moon hung low and bright, casting silver light over the manicured hedges. Olivia parked and sat in her car for a moment, exhaling. The ultrasound image swam behind her eyelids. She felt a rush of protectiveness, an instinct to shield this new life from the storm she sensed on the horizon. She entered quietly through a side door, expecting darkness. But to her surprise, a single lamp glowed in the lounge adjacent to the foyer. One of the security staff, Mr. Roberts, spotted her, stepping forward with an apologetic expression. "Dr. Bennett, sorry to bother you, but Mrs. Hayes is awake and very upset. She wanted me to fetch you if you returned." Alarmed, Olivia rushed upstairs. She found Mrs. Hayes sitting in bed, eyes wide and tearful. The older woman's hands clutched the sheets so tightly her knuckles turned white. "I dreamed he was in trouble," she blurted the moment Olivia approached. "Something terrible happened to William. I could feel it." Olivia pressed a cool hand to Mrs. Hayes's forehead, checking her temperature and pulse. "You're safe, Mrs. Hayes. He's not in any trouble. It was just a nightmare." But Mrs. Hayes shook her head insistently, tears sliding down her cheeks. "No, it's more than that. I can't let him go without telling him how much I need him." Seeing the genuine terror in her eyes, Olivia realized the older woman's heartbreak was intensifying her confusion. She carefully administered a mild sedative, and as Mrs. Hayes's grip on her relaxed, she sank back onto the pillows. "Stay," she pleaded, voice trembling with exhaustion. "I will," Olivia promised. She pulled up a chair next to the bed, gently holding Mrs. Hayes's hand. The older woman's eyes fluttered shut, the sedative easing her distress, though tears still clung to her lashes. Olivia watched the slow rise and fall of Mrs. Hayes's chest, her own emotions swirling. She, too, felt fear for William, fear that they were running out of time to fix the frayed edges of this family, to share her secret in a way that wouldn't unravel everything. The moonlight through the drapes cast ghostly shadows on the floor, reminding Olivia that until William returned, each night in the estate would be marked by an uneasy silence. Somewhere thousands of miles away, William was probably lying awake in a hotel suite, drowning in corporate spreadsheets. Did he sense the storms gathering at home? The grandmother who grew more frantic with each passing day? The doctor who carried a piece of his future tucked under her heart? Eventually, Mrs. Hayes's breathing steadied into a soft, rhythmic snore. Olivia rose to dim the bedside lamp, her own exhaustion pressing in. As she closed her eyes for a moment's rest in the armchair, she gently laid a hand over her abdomen. For a second, she pictured a brighter future, one where William was back, smiling at his grandmother's slow but steady progress, holding Olivia close as they navigated the unexpected gift they'd created. But the image flickered like a candle in a drafty hall, fragile and uncertain. All she could do was hope it wouldn't be blown out by the gales of circumstance before William finally found his way home. The next morning brought news that coursed through the estate like a quiet but insistent current. William Hayes's return date was confirmed. The household staff whispered in corridors about how they needed to polish every surface, restock the pantry with William's preferred teas, and update every corner of the mansion to perfection. The cause for the sudden plan? An email from Mr. Hayes's personal assistant stating he'd be flying back in just under a week. Olivia tried to keep a calm demeanor as she overheard excited murmurs and saw staff running around with renewed purpose. Inside, her heart thundered with conflicting emotions. Finally, he's coming back. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. She stared at her calendar that evening, mentally calculating how many weeks pregnant she'd be by then, and how to navigate telling William about it. But her biggest concern was how it might all look to Mrs. Hayes. That same day, the older woman had experienced another sudden memory lapse, waking up with no clue she was even in her own bedroom. She had asked Olivia for directions to the train station, convinced she needed to pick up a little boy named William. The heartbreak of that moment lodged itself in Olivia's chest. Mrs. Hayes's struggle was intensifying. Still, the news of William's impending arrival lifted the atmosphere among the staff, as if his presence were a talisman of hope. For Mrs. Hayes especially, it could be a lifeline. If she saw him again, alive, well, devoted, her anxieties might settle. Olivia did her best to ensure that once William returned, the estate's emotional climate would be stable enough to aid his grandmother's mental health. Days passed in a haze of preparations. Olivia managed Mrs. Hayes's care with even more diligence, adjusting medication dosages with input from the lead neurologist, orchestrating mild physiotherapy sessions, and following an updated diet plan designed to maintain her strength. Meanwhile, Olivia's own health felt like a private storm. Waves of nausea and headaches struck at unpredictable times, forcing her to step away discreetly. She confided in Dr. Morgan over the phone, giving him updates on her symptoms. He urged her to schedule another prenatal appointment soon and to find a way to reduce stress, but Olivia could only promise to do her best. In her world right now, stress came with the territory. Mrs. Hayes, oblivious to Olivia's inner turmoil, clung to the news of William's return like a woman lost at sea holding onto a life raft. "He's coming home," she murmured often, smiling through the fog of her mind. "I need to be well enough to greet him." That statement only sharpened Olivia's resolve. Every day she guided Mrs. Hayes through mental exercises, memory games, and gentle walks in the garden. Some days, the older woman seemed almost like her old self, recounting bits of family lore. recalling past family vacations. Other times, she'd forget mid-sentence and grow upset, tears streaming down her cheeks as she realized her own confusion. On one of the better days, Olivia wheeled Mrs. Hayes out to the greenhouse, a glass structure bursting with vibrant orchids and exotic plants. Warmth and humidity enveloped them. Mrs. Hayes took in the blooms with a childlike wonder, pressing her nose to a bright magenta orchid. "It smells like honey," she marveled, her eyes glistening. "I've heard these were your favorites," Olivia said, smiling as she watched the woman's delight. "We thought this might cheer you up." Mrs. Hayes offered a shaky but grateful grin. "Thank you, dear." She paused, studying Olivia's face. "You look tired again. Are you sure you're not ill?" Unprepared for the question, Olivia hesitated. "I'm fine," she insisted a little too quickly. "Just juggling a lot. Being a resident doctor doesn't leave much time for sleep." The older woman seemed to accept that explanation, though her gaze lingered on Olivia with concern. They lapsed into a companionable silence, with the soft hiss of the greenhouse's sprinklers and the flutter of butterfly wings in the warm air. Finally, the day of William's homecoming arrived, a bright, crisp morning with sunbeams cutting through the estate windows at gentle angles. At precisely 8 a.m., the staff initiated a flurry of last-minute tasks, checking every room's tidiness, adjusting floral arrangements, and ensuring the kitchen was stocked with fresh fruit and William's favorite coffee blend. Olivia felt her nerves tighten. She'd barely slept the night before, rehearsing how to tell William about her pregnancy. Would she do it as soon as he stepped out of the car? No, that was too abrupt. During his grandmother's afternoon nap, maybe? On a quiet walk through the garden? She had no easy answers, but she knew she couldn't delay forever. Mrs. Hayes, too, was on edge, though in her own confused way. She fluttered from one room to another, restless and eager. "I need to find the blue scarf," she insisted at one point, rummaging through drawers. "He bought it for me in Paris, and I want to wear it when he arrives." Carmen, the nurse, handed her the scarf, an elegant navy blue silk patterned with tiny gold flowers. Mrs. Hayes clasped it to her chest, looking relieved. "I'm ready," she whispered. Outside, just after lunch, the main gates opened. A sleek black SUV glided along the driveway, coming to a stop in front of the imposing double doors. Olivia watched from a window on the second floor, heart pounding. She saw William step out, straightening his suit jacket. He looked tired, dark circles under his eyes, but resolute, as though he'd willed himself through countless meetings just to make it here. Without waiting for a formal introduction, he hurried inside. Mrs. Hayes was there in the foyer, perched in her wheelchair, the navy blue scarf around her neck. When William caught sight of her, his expression melted from businesslike composure to warm relief. "Grandmother," he said softly, dropping to one knee beside her. Her hands trembled as they found his. "You're home," she breathed, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I was so afraid, William, afraid something might happen to you." He squeezed her hands gently. "I'm sorry. Business took longer than expected." Glancing around at the staff, he exhaled. "Thank you all for keeping everything running smoothly. It's good to be back." Olivia lingered at the edge of the foyer, her breath catching in her throat. He hadn't noticed her yet, his attention wholly fixed on his grandmother. But finally, William stood, meeting Olivia's gaze across the room. A dozen unspoken words passed between them in that single look. "I've missed you. I'm glad you're safe. We need to talk." Over the next hour, William was swept into family matters, private discussions with his grandmother, checking the household accounts, and quietly thanking each staff member for their care. Eventually, he made his way to the estate's private clinic to review Mrs. Hayes's medical status. When Olivia saw him entering the clinic's corridor, she subtly beckoned him into a smaller office. He shut the door behind them, the click echoing in the silence. She saw fatigue etched in his features, mingling with an undercurrent of apprehension. Before she could speak, he reached out and gently took her hand. "I can't tell you how many times I wanted to drop everything and fly back," he murmured. "I'm sorry for staying away so long." Emotions welled in her chest. She squeezed his fingers. "I know it couldn't be helped, but there's so much we need to talk about. Important things." William's brow furrowed as he studied her face. "You do look pale," he admitted, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "Is everything all right?" Her mouth went dry. Just tell him. But the momentum, the timing, everything felt off. I'm just relieved you're here," she managed. "Your grandmother's condition. It's stable, but she's been anxious. She really needed you." He nodded, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly at the mention of Mrs. Hayes. "I'll do everything I can to make it up to her," he murmured. "And to you." He leaned in, tentatively, as if unsure whether he should, but when she didn't pull away, he closed the distance, pressing his lips to hers in a soft, uncertain kiss. It lasted only a moment, but it carried the warmth and longing of weeks spent apart. Olivia felt her eyes flutter shut, her heart stuttering at the closeness. They broke apart slowly. William hovered inches away, searching her gaze. "I missed you," he repeated, voice low. The confession made her chest tighten. "He needs to know, Olivia. Don't hide this any longer." But even now, the words tangled in her throat, drowned out by a swirl of relief and longing. "I missed you too," she said softly. A gentle knock sounded on the door, jolting them both. Carmen's voice filtered in. "Dr. Bennett, Mrs. Hayes is asking for Mr. Hayes. She's worried he'll vanish again." William closed his eyes briefly as if wrestling with frustration at the intrusion, then forced a small grin. "We'll continue this," he told Olivia. "But my grandmother comes first." She nodded, swallowing the knot in her throat. "Yes, of course. Go to her." He left quickly, leaving Olivia alone in the small office, her thoughts spinning. The moment had slipped away, and with it, another opportunity to reveal her secret. The reality hit her. Telling William that she was pregnant wouldn't be simple or clean. It risked upending the balance they had, and might overwhelm him at a time when his grandmother's health was so precarious. That evening, William insisted on a simple family meal in a less formal dining area. He asked Olivia to join, along with Mrs. Hayes and a few key staff members who had been intimately involved in her care. Mrs. Hayes was in high spirits, albeit a bit disoriented at times. She clung to William's hand, smiling drowsily as conversation ebbed and flowed. Olivia sat across from William, trying to ignore the flutter in her abdomen every time he glanced her way. She noticed the lines of tension around his eyes and mouth, signs of someone who had taken on more than any single person should. Yet he smiled at his grandmother with genuine fondness, and Olivia felt her heart ache with tenderness. After dinner, William offered Mrs. Hayes a gentle hug and guided her to a nurse who would help her to bed. Then he turned to Olivia. "Walk with me?" he asked quietly. She agreed, and they ventured into the estate's main garden, where elegant lanterns lit winding stone paths. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of nearby roses. They strolled in silence for a while, until they reached a small gazebo overlooking a koi pond. William paused there, exhaling slowly. "It feels unreal to be back," he said, taking in the garden's tranquil beauty. "I've been operating in crisis mode for weeks, but now I see grandmother. She looks weaker." "She's had difficult spells," Olivia admitted, stepping closer. "But she's holding on, hoping for more time with you." He closed his eyes, guilt flashing in his expression. "I want that too. I can't let her down. And I can't let you down either. Something's been on your mind, I can tell. Did something happen while I was gone?" She froze, heart hammering. He's asking directly now. You can't dodge it forever. She swallowed the rising panic, trying to speak. But just then, the crunch of gravel behind them interrupted. One of the security staff hurried forward, calling William's name. "Sir, apologies for the intrusion," the man said breathlessly. "But you have an urgent call from Hong Kong. They say it can't wait." William's jaw tightened with frustration, but he nodded. "All right, I'll be right there." The security guard departed as quickly as he had appeared. A regretful sigh escaped William. This is what my life has become, constantly torn between a million obligations. He placed a hand briefly on Olivia's shoulder. "I'm sorry. We'll finish this conversation." As he rushed off toward the mansion, Olivia stood there, the koi pond reflecting shimmering lantern light. She felt tears sting her eyes, a tangled knot of disappointment and relief. Time after time her confession was thwarted by circumstance. And how many chances will we have before something else happens? Something worse. The koi swirled lazily in the water, oblivious to human worries. Overhead, the night sky gleamed with scattered stars. Olivia brushed away a tear, torn between the peacefulness of the garden and the turmoil in her heart. A baby. William's grandmother's fragile health, his global business empire teetering on the edge of expansions and mergers. There was no neat script for how to handle it all. Yet as she turned to head back inside, she felt a tiny, instinctual surge of hope. "Maybe tomorrow," she told herself. "I'll find the courage to tell him tomorrow." An amber sunrise crept across the estate grounds, illuminating the dew on hedges and the polished stone of the mansion's facade. Despite the early hour, Olivia was already awake, seated at the small desk in her private suite. The air smelled faintly of lavender from a diffuser someone on staff had thoughtfully provided, an attempt to help her rest better. She tapped a pen against a blank notepad, heart pounding with restless energy. Today was the day, she decided. She would find a moment, create a moment, if need be, to tell William about the pregnancy. They'd already lost too many opportunities to urgency or interruption, and her condition couldn't remain hidden forever. Dr. Morgan had warned her repeatedly that prolonged stress and secrecy might harm her or the baby. Besides, William deserved to know. He had a right to the truth, especially when it came to something so life-altering. A timid knock at the door broke her reverie. "Come in," she called, straightening her posture. Carmen peeked inside, an apologetic expression on her face. "Sorry to disturb you, Dr. Bennett, but Mrs. Hayes is requesting her morning therapy session earlier than usual. She said she doesn't want to wait." Olivia blinked. "That's all right. I'll be right down." Carmen hesitated. "She's a bit more alert today. She's even asked to look over some estate ledgers, claims she wants to check something about the family finances." That made Olivia raise an eyebrow. "The ledgers? Those would be decades old. She might be mixing up different periods of her life." Yet deep down, Olivia felt a glimmer of encouragement. If Mrs. Hayes was interested in something as specific as financial records, that might indicate a period of lucidity. She hurriedly tucked away her blank notepad, the one she'd hoped to fill with talking points for William. The conversation can wait until after therapy, she told herself, though anxiety churned in her gut. In Mrs. Hayes' sitting room, the older woman was upright in a plush armchair, an array of old folders spread on the coffee table. Her eyes flicked up when Olivia entered, and a small smile curved her lips. "Good morning, dear," she greeted, in a voice that sounded clearer than usual. "I was just telling Carmen that I want to make sure everything is in order here at the house. It's been so long since I looked at the finances, but I used to keep them in impeccable shape." Olivia offered a gentle nod. "Yes, that's what I understand. You were the backbone of the family business for years, even after William took over. How are you feeling today?" Mrs. Hayes sighed, glancing down at the rows of figures, fund allocations, charitable donations, property taxes from decades past. "Sometimes I forget the year, or the day, but not this morning. Something sharp here," she said, tapping her temple lightly. "Feels like I'm awake again, if only for a little while." Olivia tried to keep her tone bright. "That's wonderful. Perhaps we can do some memory exercises while you look through these records, see if it helps reinforce certain details." The older woman nodded, flipping through a ledger with surprising dexterity. For several minutes, Olivia guided her through gentle prompts. What year is listed on these documents? Do you recall which properties the family owned at that time? Mrs. Hayes responded with a thoughtfulness that left Olivia nearly speechless. She correctly named old business partners, recalled when the estate's greenhouse was constructed, and even remembered details of a local library donation. It was a window of clarity, an ephemeral but precious glimpse of the woman she once was. Eventually, though, Mrs. Hayes's hands stilled on a page, her brow furrowed. I see all these accounts, these expansions, and William has built them beyond imagining, hasn't he? Olivia nodded softly. Yes, Hayes Industries is enormous now, global, with technology ventures, philanthropic initiatives, real estate expansions. Then why? Mrs. Hayes swallowed, eyes shining with unshed tears. Why do I feel like something's missing? I can't place it. Some detail, something in the air here at home. Something about you, dear. Olivia felt a jolt. The older woman's gaze was direct, too perceptive. She forced a careful smile. About me? I'm your live-in resident doctor, that's all. I'm here to care for you. Mrs. Hayes studied her, a flicker of suspicion crossing her features. Your face? It's changed, hasn't it? You're paler, or maybe there's a glow. My mother used to say pregnant women glowed. The word struck like a lightning bolt. Olivia's chest constricted. Mrs. Hayes. Before she could muster a deflection, the older woman's gaze dropped to Olivia's midsection. Oh my God, are you? She trailed off, confusion swirling with dawning realization. Is that what you're hiding? Olivia's heart hammered. I wasn't hiding, she stammered, struggling. It's complicated. Mrs. Hayes's thin brows rose. Complicated how? Then her eyes widened even more. William? Is it William's child? The shock on Olivia's face must have confirmed it. Guilt, fear, and relief all warred inside her as she realized she couldn't lie. Certainly not with Mrs. Hayes looking at her with such uncharacteristic lucidity. Trembling, Olivia sank onto the arm of the couch. It's so new, she whispered, voice trembling. I only found out a few weeks ago when he was abroad. I've tried to tell him since he got back, but there's never a good moment. Your health, everything else, I just haven't had the chance. Mrs. Hayes's face softened. Oh, my dear girl. She reached a hand out and Olivia grasped it, tears pricking her eyes. I'm so sorry, Olivia choked. I never wanted to betray your trust. It was unexpected, but it happened. And we don't regret. She exhaled shakily. At least I don't. I'm just terrified. Mrs. Hayes gently patted her hand. I see. There was a moment of quiet as the older woman visibly processed this revelation. When she finally spoke again, her voice was gentler than Olivia had ever heard it. I know William. He's not perfect, but he cares deeply once he gives his heart away. Don't let fear keep you from telling him. He deserves to know, and you need his support. Tears slipped down Olivia's cheeks. You're right, she whispered. I promise I'll tell him. Today. I just hope he's ready for it. Mrs. Hayes smiled faintly. If he's not, well, I'll straighten him out. A spark of her old formidable spirit surfaced in that wry remark. Then a hint of sadness shadowed her features. If only I had more time, more clarity, to help him see what matters most in life. He's always so busy, so focused on building the empire. He forgets the small wonders around him. Olivia gently squeezed the older woman's hand. We'll remind him together, she said softly. They stayed like that for a few moments, holding hands while the morning light cast a golden glow through the window. For once, Mrs. Hayes seemed calm, almost peaceful. Olivia blinked away tears, overwhelmed by the sudden role reversal, a patient comforting her doctor. But she recognized that, in some ways, this was how real relationships formed. Caring didn't always flow in one direction. They proceeded with the memory therapy, but after about 20 minutes, Mrs. Hayes's lucidity began to fray. She stumbled over words, losing track of which ledger she was reading. Finally, she sat back, disoriented. "I'm so tired," she murmured. "Where did I put that scarf?" Olivia exchanged a look with Carmen, who hovered nearby. The moment of clarity had passed, slipping through their fingers like sand. Still, a gentle happiness warmed Olivia's chest. Mrs. Hayes had recognized the truth about her pregnancy, even if just momentarily. That small spark of awareness felt like a blessing. They guided the older woman to rest. As Mrs. Hayes drifted into a light sleep, Olivia quietly left the room, determined to track down William. Her hands shook with anticipation. She had promised Mrs. Hayes and herself that the secret wouldn't remain unspoken another day. She found William in the estate's sizable home office, surrounded by files and speaking with a man in a suit, likely one of his top executives. The conversation sounded urgent, but Olivia caught William's eye from the hallway. He immediately signaled for the man to pause, then walked over. "Olivia," he greeted, concern edging his voice. "Is everything okay with grandmother?" "She's resting now," Olivia said, schooling her features. "But I need to speak with you privately. It's important." William's face tightened with worry. He glanced at his associate. "Wait here," he ordered, and then guided Olivia out into an adjoining library, shutting the door behind them. "Tell me, is something wrong? Did grandmother have a relapse?" "No, not exactly." Olivia tried to steady her breath, her pulse roaring in her ears. The library's shelves towered around them, thick volumes forming a silent audience. "Just say it." "William, I've wanted to tell you this since before you returned, but the timing never seemed right." He searched her eyes, brow creased. "You can tell me anything." She pressed a hand lightly over her abdomen, voice catching in her throat. "William, I'm pregnant." Silence. For a split second she thought maybe he hadn't heard, but then she saw the shock flood his features, eyes widening, Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed. "You're what?" he breathed, taking a step closer. His gaze darted from her face to the gentle curve of her midsection. When?" He shook his head, struggling to catch up. "When did you find out?" Her voice shook. "While you were abroad. It happened. Well, that night after the long day with your grandmother, She flushed. "It just happened. Neither of us planned it, obviously." He raked a hand through his hair, still reeling. "And you've been dealing with this alone all these weeks? Why didn't you call me?" Tears pricked her eyes. "You were in the middle of high-stakes negotiations. Your grandmother's condition was fragile. I was scared. I didn't want to distract you. I kept telling myself I'd wait until you got back, but then we barely had a moment alone." She tried to steady her breathing. "I'm sorry if I made the wrong choice, but yes, I'm pregnant. And I'm terrified." William let out a shuddering exhale. Slowly he reached out and cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing a stray tear. I wish you hadn't felt you had to shoulder this alone." His voice was gentle, eyes brimming with a mix of concern and wonder. "My God, Olivia, a baby!" She laughed shakily, tears slipping free. "I know, it's crazy. And I know the timing is awful. There's your grandmother, the empire you're running." He pressed a finger to her lips, silencing her. "Stop. This baby, our baby, matters more than any business deal." He paused, eyes flicking to the door as if worried about eavesdroppers, but then refocused on her. "I'm shocked, yes, but I'm not angry. Not at all. Just overwhelmed." Relief flooded Olivia, her shoulders sagging as though a massive weight had been lifted. She let out a ragged breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "So you're okay with this?" William swallowed, nodding slowly. "It's definitely a surprise. We'll have challenges. Grandmother, the ethical lines of your job, the media once they find out. But I'm not going anywhere. Do you hear me? I want to be here, for you and for our child." Emotions spilled from Olivia in a rush, fear, gratitude, and an unexpected rush of joy. She wrapped her arms around him, burying her face against his shoulder. He held her gently but firmly, kissing the crown of her head as her tears dampened his shirt. They stood like that for a long moment in the quiet library, the hush of the estate enveloping them. Outside, staff members bustled, unaware that the future of the Hayes family had just shifted irrevocably. At last, William drew back, brushing her tears away. "We'll figure this out," he promised, voice low and steady. "Together. No more secrets, no more waiting until the perfect moment." She nodded, heart thudding with cautious optimism. "Thank you, and there's one more thing you should know." She hesitated, swallowing. "Your grandmother sort of figured it out this morning. She had a lucid moment." His brows shot up. "She did? Is she? She's resting now, but she was the one who encouraged me to tell you. She wants us to face this openly." William closed his eyes for a moment, touched. "That sounds like her," he murmured, a faint smile curving his lips. "Despite her illness, she still wants to protect me, and maybe protect us as well." Olivia squeezed his hands. "I'm sorry it took me so long to say anything. So much has happened." He gently tipped her chin up. "Don't apologize anymore. We'll deal with everything. My grandmother's condition, the press, your position as her doctor, one step at a time. Right now, I just need to be with you." A warm flush spread across Olivia's cheeks. She felt for the first time in weeks a spark of genuine hope. The road ahead would be rocky, she was certain of that. But in William's eyes, she saw commitment, not blame or panic. It was enough to make her believe they could navigate the tempest of family expectations, medical ethics, and the unstoppable demands of the Hayes empire. Hand in hand, they walked out of the library into the bustling corridor. Staff members paused momentarily to greet them, oblivious to the life-altering revelation that had just unfolded behind closed doors. As William guided Olivia toward a quieter part of the mansion, she clutched his hand like a lifeline. "One step at a time," she echoed in her mind, her heart finally lighter than it had been in weeks. Word spread quickly throughout the Hayes estate that William was in high spirits. Though the staff didn't know the exact reason, they sensed a shift in his demeanor. He spoke more softly to Mrs. Hayes, lingered in the corridors as though savoring each moment at home, and occasionally flashed Olivia a private smile that hinted at a secret shared only between them. Meanwhile, Mrs. Hayes had retreated into another bout of confusion after her morning of remarkable clarity. That left Olivia and William with the delicate task of deciding how and when to make future announcements about the pregnancy. For now, they kept it private. There were enough challenges with Mrs. Hayes's precarious condition, one step at a time, as they'd promised. "So what's our plan?" Olivia asked one evening, perched on a stool in the estate's large kitchen. She watched as William prepared 2 cups of tea, surprisingly at ease in the once intimidating culinary space. A gentle hush had fallen over the mansion. Mrs. Hayes was asleep, the staff mostly retired for the night. William placed a steaming mug in front of her and sank onto a stool across the granite island. "First, we talk to my grandmother, if she has another lucid moment. She deserves to hear it from me directly, not in scattered pieces of memory." Olivia nodded, blowing on her tea, a warmth pooling in her chest. "That's fair. We can handle the rest, like the press or my role here at the estate after that. But do you think she'll have enough clarity to understand?" A flicker of sadness crossed William's expression. "I'm not sure. Alzheimer's is cruel that way. One day she's almost herself. The next day she can't remember me. But we won't hide this from her if she's capable of knowing. She adores you, you know." The admission sent a soft pang through Olivia's heart. She glanced at her belly, still not visibly rounded but holding a secret that felt like it grew heavier by the day. "I hope she'll be happy for us," she murmured. William reached across the counter to rest a hand on hers. "She will be," he promised, voice firm. She wants me to live, not just exist. And that's what this baby means. A life beyond corporate boardrooms. Olivia's throat tightened with unexpected emotion. She squeezed his hand, grateful for the sureness in his eyes. Sometimes I still can't believe it, she admitted softly. This house, our roles, it's a far cry from my life as a hospital resident. And now, parenthood. He stood, moving around the counter to sit beside her. We'll figure it all out, he said, pressing a comforting hand between her shoulder blades. We can't do it alone, of course. We'll need help. My grandmother's doctors, your mentor, maybe some of our family friends, but I want us to tackle it together, openly. She turned her face toward him, heart beating faster. I'm sorry if I ever doubted your reaction, she whispered, eyes glistening. I was so worried you'd see this as another burden, another demand on your time. I know how much pressure you're already under. He shook his head, voice low with conviction. You and our baby? That's not a burden. It's a gift I never saw coming. I'd be a fool to reject it. Olivia leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. For a moment, they sipped their tea in an easy quiet, a bubble of contentment in the hush of the sleeping mansion. In the distance, the wind rustled the leaves in the garden, and somewhere a clock chimed the hour. This was the first time in weeks Olivia had felt truly at peace. The following morning, Olivia tended to Mrs. Hayes while William stepped out to handle a round of urgent business calls. The older woman was withdrawn, offering few responses. Her earlier burst of lucidity seemed a distant memory. Olivia guided her through a puzzle of matching images to words, but Mrs. Hayes stared blankly, mumbling about places and people Olivia didn't recognize. By late afternoon, Mrs. Hayes's agitation worsened. She paced the corridors in her wheelchair, insisting she had to catch a train or meet father at the orchard. It became clear she was in the midst of a disorganized episode. Carmen, the nurse, softly administered a mild sedative under Olivia's supervision to calm her nerves. Even so, anxiety lingered on the older woman's face as she dozed off. Around dinner time, Olivia found William in the estate study, poring over documents. He looked up, expression weary. How is she? Not good today, Olivia replied quietly. She shut the door behind her. She's drifting in and out of these confused states, talking about people from decades ago. She mentioned her father, which I haven't heard before. I gave her a small dose to help her rest. William let out a slow exhale, massaging his temples. I wish I could do more. Watching her slip like this. He trailed off, shaking his head. I'm not ready to lose her, Olivia. She approached, lightly touching his arm. I know. But we can still make her days meaningful. And who knows, she might have another moment of clarity. Alzheimer's isn't always linear. The layers of grief and guilt in his eyes tore at her heart. But she also sensed he was holding on to something, a kind of silent determination. Let me show you something, he said finally, turning his laptop around so she could see the screen. I've been in talks about a new philanthropic fund, a large donation to Alzheimer's research in my grandmother's name. It's in the early stages, but if she stabilizes enough to understand, maybe she'll see what I'm doing in her honor. Olivia felt a rush of admiration. William, that's beautiful. She leaned over to scan the proposal details. Millions of dollars earmarked for research, clinical trials, and support programs for families coping with dementia. This could help so many people. It could help us too, he murmured. I have all the resources in the world, but none of it feels like it's enough to save her. At least this way, we can push the science forward. She wrapped her arms around his shoulders from behind, resting her cheek against the top of his head. You're doing everything you can, she whispered. I'm proud of you. He exhaled shakily, covering her hands with his. Thank you, he managed. Hearing that from you means a lot. The warmth of the moment lingered, even as the night pressed onward. Olivia glanced at the clock. Mrs. Hayes might sleep for a while, which meant she and William had a rare window to talk freely or just be together without interruption. "Do you want to join me for a short walk in the garden?" she asked quietly. "Clear our heads?" He hesitated, scanning the spreadsheet and documents on his laptop. Then he shut the lid. "Yes, let's do that." They strolled under the canopy of oak trees lining the estate's main garden path. Lanterns illuminated the path just enough to cast gentle shadows, revealing the careful landscaping and bursts of moonlit flowers. Olivia linked her arm through William's, finding comfort in the solid warmth of his presence. "Sometimes I think about what it will be like, raising a child here," she confided. "This estate feels enormous, almost too grand. I grew up in a tiny apartment with second-hand furniture. This is a world I never imagined." William gave her arm a light squeeze. "I want our child to know both worlds," he said thoughtfully. "Yes, they'll inherit privilege, but I don't want them to be shielded from reality. I want them to understand empathy and humility." A fond smile tugged at Olivia's lips. "That's all I can ask for," she murmured. A moment of comfortable silence passed. Then she breathed, "We'll need to tell the staff at some point, especially if my role shifts. They might notice I can't do certain medical tasks if I get too far along." He nodded, gaze drifting over the sculpted hedges. "That's true. We'll have to be ready for that." He paused, turning to face her under the soft glow of a lantern. "What about your career? Once you're showing, do you plan to continue as grandmother's doctor or—" She swallowed, a mix of fear and resolve tightening her chest. "I need to think carefully about that. Ethically, it's already a gray area to be her live-in physician while having a personal relationship with her grandson. Add a pregnancy to the mix." She trailed off, grimacing. "It might raise more questions than we can handle. I could switch to a consulting role, and we could bring in another resident to assist, but I don't want to abandon Mrs. Hayes entirely." William frowned, thoughtful. "We'll find a balance. Your well-being, and the babies, must come first. But I also know how important your work here has been. Grandmother trusts you. We'll navigate it together." She appreciated the reassurance. They continued walking until they reached a small pavilion overlooking a pond. Fireflies sparkled on the far bank and the water's surface rippled in the faint breeze. Olivia rested against the pavilion's railing. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice carrying a hint of emotion. "I keep saying that, but I mean it. I'm so grateful you're not running away from this." He brushed a thumb over her cheek, a tender gesture. "I'd never run away. You and this child, you're my family. I just wish my grandmother could see the future that's unfolding." His voice caught. "I want her to meet her great-grandchild with full awareness, to smile and know there's another Hayes continuing the legacy." Olivia held his gaze, understanding the depth of his longing. "She still has time," she said gently. "Don't give up hope." He exhaled, nodding. "I won't." They stood there, letting the ambiance of the quiet estate envelop them. For once, the monstrous weight of business calls, medical crises, and inheritance burdens felt distant. In their place was a calm certainty that they were in this together, forging a fragile but genuine path toward a shared future. Back inside, as they made their way through a corridor, they noticed Carmen rushing toward them. The nurse's face was anxious. "Mr. Hayes, Dr. Bennett, Mrs. Hayes is awake and calling for both of you," she said breathlessly. "She's quite agitated. Says she has something urgent to tell you." Olivia and William exchanged worried looks and followed Carmen toward Mrs. Hayes's bedroom. They found the older woman propped up against pillows, eyes shining with a strange mix of clarity and desperation. Her hands trembled on the blanket. "William," she rasped, beckoning him close. He hurried to her side, gently taking her hand. Olivia approached from the other side, feeling the tension crackle in the air. "Grandmother, I'm here," William soothed, leaning in. "What is it?" Mrs. Hayes's gaze swung between the two of them, her breathing unsteady. "I remember something," she said, voice low. "A conversation. Old secrets. I don't want to go without clearing the air. I need to tell you both." She suddenly inhaled sharply, wincing as if in pain. Olivia quickly checked her pulse and blood pressure, which were spiking. "Mrs. Hayes, take slow breaths," she urged. But the older woman persisted, gripping William's hand so tightly her knuckles went white. "Listen, the night your parents died, not an accident. There was more going on. The board, the deals." She coughed, struggling for breath. "We all kept it quiet, but you need to know. The family secrets. You'll be a father now. You must protect." Her words tumbled into incoherence. Alarmed, Olivia helped Carmen elevate Mrs. Hayes's head, carefully checking her oxygen levels. William's face paled, pulse racing as he watched his grandmother gasp. Olivia grabbed a stethoscope, heart pounding. "Mrs. Hayes, calm down. We can talk later. Your health—" But Mrs. Hayes's breathing grew shallower, the flush of exertion brightening her cheeks. She moaned, eyes rolling back slightly. "Have to tell you the truth," she croaked. "You're not safe. Watch the board. They're—" She sagged against the pillows, body trembling. William panicked, his voice cracking. "Olivia, do something!" "Stay calm," Olivia commanded, snapping into doctor mode. She signaled Carmen for the emergency medication kit. "Mrs. Hayes is experiencing severe distress. We need to stabilize her now." Within seconds, Olivia administered an IV sedative and oxygen support. Mrs. Hayes's frantic breathing eased, but her eyes drifted shut, consciousness slipping away. For a moment the room was silent except for the beeping of medical equipment. William stood there, hands shaking. "What was she talking about?" he whispered. "Something about my parents' death not being an accident." She sounded terrified. Olivia wrapped an arm around him, her own heart hammering. "I'm not sure. We can't force her to speak when she's like this. Her health comes first. Let's get her stable. Then we'll see if she can clarify." But even as they worked to ensure Mrs. Hayes's vitals were returning to baseline, Olivia couldn't shake a sudden dread gnawing at her chest. The Hayes family had always been influential. Had there been hidden shadows behind the glossy, philanthropic exterior? She glanced at William, who looked both shattered and furious. In the hush that followed, Mrs. Hayes remained unconscious, her features etched with strain. Carmen hovered, ready to adjust medication. William gripped the bed's edge, swallowing hard. "My parents died in a plane crash," he said numbly. "They told me it was mechanical failure, but if grandmother believes something else happened—" Olivia exchanged a worried look with him. This was new territory, an unexpected layer of complexity added to an already delicate situation. The baby, Mrs. Hayes's deteriorating mind, William's empire, and now a cryptic hint of old conspiracies. She placed a gentle hand over William's shoulder. "We have to focus on her immediate needs," she said softly. "Once she's stable, maybe she can explain. It might be just confusion, or it might be something real. Either way, we can't let it undo her progress or your peace of mind." He nodded dazedly, still reeling. "Yes," he murmured, but his eyes stayed locked on his grandmother's drawn face. "But if she's right? If there's more to my parents' deaths? How far does it go? And does it have anything to do with us, me, you, or the child?" A heavy stillness fell in the room, punctuated by the steady beep of the monitor. Olivia's mind spun with questions she couldn't answer. All she knew was that Mrs. Hayes's cryptic warning now hung in the air, casting a dark shadow over the future she and William were just beginning to envision. For the rest of that tense evening, the Hayes mansion felt wrapped in a suffocating kind of silence. Even the air seemed heavier, as though the very walls were absorbing Mrs. Hayes's ominous words about the past. Nurses and staff tiptoed through the halls, exchanging anxious glances. William stationed himself at his grandmother's bedside, watching every slow rise and fall of her chest. Meanwhile, Olivia hovered nearby, struggling to maintain her composure as both a doctor and someone personally entwined with the family's fate. Morning arrived, cold and gray, as though the weather itself reflected the unease within the estate. Olivia stirred awake in the chair she'd pulled close to Mrs. Hayes's bed. Her neck ached from sleeping upright, and her stomach churned with the familiar wave of nausea she'd come to expect each morning. She glanced over at William, who'd dozed off in a second armchair, still fully dressed from the night before. Mrs. Hayes was still in a deep sleep, her vitals stable, but her expression drawn. Gingerly, Olivia checked the older woman's pulse and respiration rate, all within normal limits, given the circumstances. That alone was a relief. Despite the worry over her cryptic warning, physically she seemed to have weathered the night. Needing a moment to gather her thoughts, Olivia excused herself to the ensuite bathroom. She ran cold water over her hands, staring at her reflection in the mirror. One crisis at a time, she told herself. The baby needed her calm, Mrs. Hayes needed her steady, and William needed answers, or at least some comfort in the face of a possible conspiracy. When she returned, William was awake, rubbing his eyes and checking on his grandmother. He looked up, meeting Olivia's gaze with a flicker of relief. "She's stirring," he said quietly. "Maybe she'll be more coherent this morning." They watched in hushed anticipation as Mrs. Hayes's eyelids fluttered open. For a heartbeat, confusion clouded her expression. But then something like recognition dawned. She managed a weak smile at William. "You're here," she whispered, her voice scratchy. I had a dream. Or maybe it wasn't a dream." William took her hand. "You said something last night," he ventured softly, measuring each word. "About my parents, about the board, some danger." Her frail hand trembled. Olivia stood at the foot of the bed, monitoring the older woman's vitals but also bracing for what she might say. Mrs. Hayes's eyes flicked to Olivia and then back to William. Her gaze cleared for an instant, and she swallowed, lips parting. "I was there when it all happened," she said, voice raspy but urgent. "Your parents wanted to take a different route with the company. Less risk, fewer ruthless expansions. Some board members, old business partners, they pressed for deals that led to hidden corruption. When your parents refused, it stirred dangerous enemies. I always suspected the plane crash wasn't a random mechanical failure. It was sabotage." William inhaled sharply, knuckles whitening around his grandmother's hand. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" His tone wavered between betrayal and heartbreak. Tears slipped down Mrs. Hayes's cheeks. "I had no proof, just suspicions. By the time I pieced it all together, you'd already inherited the empire. I thought burying it would protect you. Then your expansions took off, and I kept silent, hoping you'd never face the same threats." A silence fell, cold as ice. Olivia's breath caught in her chest, stunned by the gravity of Mrs. Hayes's revelation. She had half expected some measure of confusion or exaggeration, but the older woman spoke with eerie conviction, as though she'd been safeguarding this secret for decades. William pressed his free hand to his forehead, absorbing the blow. "Grandmother, if that's true, we have to investigate. We need to find out who was behind it." Mrs. Hayes nodded weakly. "You must, William, but be careful. Some of those old ties may still linger in the boardroom. They were cunning enough to orchestrate your parents' demise. They'd do worse if they see you unraveling their secrets." Olivia fought the urge to rush forward and comfort William, but in his grandmother's presence, he kept composure, locking his grief behind a calm veneer. "I'll handle it," he promised. "I won't let them harm you, or anyone else." Mrs. Hayes's lips curved in a sad, grateful smile. Her eyes flitted to Olivia. "You'll stand by him?" she asked softly. Olivia stepped closer, placing a reassuring hand on William's shoulder. "I will," she said, heart pounding. "We'll handle it together, whatever the truth is." Satisfied, Mrs. Hayes closed her eyes, tears clinging to her lashes. Her energy drained, the effort to speak so plainly taking its toll. Olivia quickly checked her vital signs, relieved to find them relatively stable. The older woman was exhausted, but at least not in immediate physical danger. As she drifted off to rest again, William held her hand until her grip went limp with sleep. Then he rose, stepping away from the bed. His eyes, when they met Olivia's, burned with a mix of anger and sorrow. "We can't ignore this," he muttered. She ushered him into a quieter corner of the bedroom. "I agree, but we must tread carefully. Any rash move could spook the people she's talking about, and it could cause more distress for her." William nodded, breath quivering. "I'll start by reviewing old records, private contracts from the time of my parents' leadership. Maybe I can find a clue, dates that don't match, suspicious transactions. If it was sabotage, there must be a paper trail somewhere." Olivia recalled the philanthropic plans William had for Alzheimer's research. She wondered how that might intertwine with unraveling a decades-old conspiracy. "I can help," she said, though uncertainty laced her words. "But I'm not a corporate investigator. Still, I can comb through archives for inconsistencies, anything that might stand out." He gave a faint nod, gaze flicking to Mrs. Hayes's unconscious form. "We do it quietly, and we keep grandmother's condition stable above all." She took his hand, their fingers interlacing. "Agreed. One step at a time." Over the next several days, a covert investigation took shape within the Hayes estate. William quietly requested boxes of old financial ledgers, shipping logs, and archived emails that spanned back to his parents' era. He set up a private workspace in a disused corner of the mansion's second floor, away from prying eyes. Olivia spent her breaks from caring for Mrs. Hayes discreetly flipping through old files, scanning for any anomalies. The staff noticed the hush of secrecy, but didn't question it openly. Rumors spread that Mr. Hayes was working on a new philanthropic venture or reorganizing his inheritance. Only Carmen, who was close to Olivia, suspected there was more going on, yet she kept her distance, respecting boundaries. At first, the search yielded little. Records mostly appeared routine. But one afternoon, Olivia unearthed a series of personal notes penned by William's father, references to boardroom disagreements and veiled threats. The handwriting grew shakier in later entries, culminating in an ominous final line. "If we don't comply, they'll push us out. Or worse." Heart-pounding, she showed William, who read the lines with grim resolve. "This lines up with what grandmother hinted," he said, voice taut. "They were warned. And then their plane went down." They exchanged a look, both of them unsettled, yet a flicker of vindication in William's eyes. It wasn't a smoking gun, but it was evidence that something more sinister had been at play. Meanwhile, Mrs. Hayes's condition fluctuated, but she remained stable enough for daily checkups. She occasionally voiced drowsy questions about whether William had taken care of it yet, though she didn't elaborate further. And each time William reassured her that he was on it, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. Late one evening, Olivia found William alone in the second-floor workspace, poring over more records. He looked exhausted, dark shadows under his eyes. Yet a fierce determination blazed in his expression. "How long have you been at it?" she asked gently, stepping inside and placing a hand on his shoulder. He ran a hand through his hair. "Hours, possibly all day. I lost track." He pointed to a ledger from the year of his parents' accident. "Look, there's a sudden spike in subcontractor expenses right before their final flight, money funneled to an anonymous shell company. If I can trace that shell company's ownership, we might find who engineered the sabotage." Admiration and worry tangled in Olivia's chest. "I'm proud of you for chasing the truth, but you need rest. If you burn out, you can't help anyone." He let out a shaky exhale, turning in his chair to face her. "You're right. Every step I take reveals more reason to believe grandmother's suspicions. I feel like I'm stepping into a minefield. If the same people are still around, they won't appreciate me digging up old skeletons." Olivia stroked his hair, letting her gaze fall to the gentle curve of her abdomen. "We'll be careful," she promised. "Your grandmother trusts you to do this, and soon you'll have a child who needs you safe as well. I can't bear the thought of something happening to you, William." He looked up, eyes softening. "I won't let them threaten our family again," he said firmly. "Not you, not grandmother, not our baby." They embraced, the hush of the estate amplifying the beat of their hearts. In that moment, Olivia believed him, believed they could unearth the past without letting it destroy their future. Over the next few days, William enlisted the help of a trusted lawyer, an old friend of the Hayes family who had proven loyalty time and again. Under tight confidentiality, they traced the suspicious shell company to an offshore account managed by an entity that had ties to several old board members from Hayes Industries. It was enough to warrant further legal action, perhaps even a private investigation to confirm wrongdoing. But before William could finalize his strategy, Mrs. Hayes took a sudden turn. Early one morning, her vitals plummeted. Olivia and Carmen rushed to her side, administering emergency medications and oxygen. William, summoned from his covert workspace, arrived breathless to find his grandmother pale and delirious. "She's in respiratory distress," Olivia said, voice tight with urgency. "We need to stabilize her now. Call the ambulance or bring in the crash cart if we have to." Mrs. Hayes rasped, eyes unfocused. She clutched William's hand, tears slipping free. "Don't leave me," she begged in a frail whisper. Olivia and Carmen worked in unison, adjusting IVs, preparing to intubate if it came to that. The staff hovered in the hallway, fear etched on their faces. After agonizing minutes, the medication took hold, and Mrs. Hayes's breathing eased, though her pulse remained tenuous. "We might have to transfer her to the hospital for close monitoring," Olivia muttered, exchanging a grave look with William. He nodded, voice shaking. "Whatever it takes, just save her." As they prepped for an ambulance, Mrs. Hayes stirred, a sudden lucidity flashing across her features. "William?" she croaked, blinking at him. He leaned in. "I'm here." She managed a faint smile. "Take care of your child," she whispered. "And the truth about your parents. It's all in the chest. Attic." A harsh cough cut off her words. Olivia shouted for sedation, and the older woman collapsed back onto the pillow, unconscious. The paramedics arrived minutes later, whisking her away on a stretcher while William and Olivia followed in a separate vehicle. At the hospital, Mrs. Hayes was admitted to the ICU, her fragile health teetering on the edge. For 2 days, she slipped in and out of consciousness. Olivia stayed with her as much as possible, though the hospital's medical team took the lead. William roamed the corridors like a restless ghost, phone in one hand, despair in his eyes. On the 3rd day, Mrs. Hayes stabilized. The doctors allowed William and Olivia into the room, cautioning that her prognosis remained uncertain. She lay amid beeping machines, IV lines snaking across her bed. Yet somehow, she smiled faintly upon seeing them together, her gaze lingering on Olivia's abdomen as though she remembered the secret she'd once divined. "We found it," William said softly, clutching her frail hand. "A chest in the attic. Old letters, diaries, more evidence pointing to the sabotage. It's enough to start a formal inquiry. I'll get justice, grandmother, I promise." She exhaled a shuddering breath, eyes shining. "Good," she whispered. "Finish what your parents started. And live, my dear boy. Don't let all this overshadow your child's arrival." Tears blurred William's vision. "I won't." Olivia stepped forward, pressing a gentle hand to Mrs. Hayes's shoulder. "We're here for you," she said softly. "You've done enough. Rest." The older woman's eyes fluttered. In a moment of clarity, she reached out for Olivia's hand too, pressing William's and Olivia's palms together. "A family," she murmured, voice trembling. "Let love be your guiding light." That final admonition hung in the air as Mrs. Hayes slipped into a peaceful doze, the sedation pulling her back under. William and Olivia exchanged tearful glances, hearts aching with gratitude and sorrow. By the end of that week, the Hayes board was rocked by the quiet revelation that William intended to launch a private investigation into the old guard's dealings. A few longtime members resigned abruptly, citing personal reasons. William's legal ally moved behind the scenes, gathering statements and forging alliances to ensure no one could easily threaten the Hayes family again. Mrs. Hayes returned to the mansion once her vitals stabilized, placed on palliative care with the understanding that her Alzheimer's had reached a critical stage. But she remained calm and oddly content, as though unburdened by the secret she'd kept for so long. She recognized Olivia with a gentle smile, occasionally asking how the little one was doing, though she quickly forgot she'd asked. In the hush of her bedroom, Mrs. Hayes had one more moment of lucidity, the day before she passed peacefully in her sleep. She opened her eyes, saw William and Olivia at her bedside, and reached for both their hands. "I love you both," she whispered. "Take care of each other. And the child. Promise me." They promised, tears streaming down their faces. She drifted off soon after, her breathing steady, a soft smile lingering. Late that night she slipped away without pain, leaving behind a legacy of devotion that spanned generations. Her funeral was a dignified affair, attended by those who'd respected her philanthropic work and quiet fortitude. William stood stoically by the casket, Olivia at his side, her pregnancy more apparent under her black dress. Whispers circulated among the mourners, some about the tragic passing of a great matriarch, others about the baby rumored to be on the way. William ignored the rumors, focusing on honoring his grandmother's memory. In the weeks that followed, media speculation buzzed over the internal reshuffling at Hayes Industries and the investigations into certain past board members. Yet William navigated it with a steadiness that surprised even himself. Each time the stress threatened to overwhelm him, he'd recall Mrs. Hayes's final words, "Let love be your guiding light." And he'd breathe, reminded that his family's future now included Olivia and their unborn child, a reason to fight for something beyond corporate power. Olivia, for her part, continued with prenatal checkups and eased out of her role as Mrs. Hayes's resident physician, pivoting to a more consultative position. Though she wrestled with guilt over leaving the hands-on care, she knew the shift was necessary, for her ethical standing and for the new life blossoming inside her. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped below the estate's manicured gardens, William led Olivia outside to the greenhouse, the very place Mrs. Hayes had once visited in a rare moment of clarity, marveling at orchids. He handed her a small envelope, eyes brimming with tenderness. Inside was a letter he'd penned. It read simply, "For our family, for what's to come, and for the legacy my grandmother believed in. I love you, Olivia. Always." Tears welled in her eyes as she embraced him, the greenhouse's warm humidity cocooning them in floral scents. For a moment, they heard nothing but the rustle of leaves and their own steady breathing. They might face new battles, legal, personal, and ethical. They might uncover more secrets about the Hayes empire. But as Olivia pressed a hand to her abdomen, feeling the faint flutter of life, she closed her eyes and remembered Mrs. Hayes's trembling words, "A family. Let love guide you." In that promise they found hope. Together they would honor the past, cherish the present, and face the future, no matter how unpredictable, with unwavering resolve and hearts bound by the silent, powerful truth that love had given them both a second chance. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Just click on the screen.